good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to the National Honey Show. I'm indeed sitting here in Germany, and I'm extremely excited. So I've been, on a lecture for a long time now, due to Corona and everything, and I hope I can everything just will be just fine. And first of all, I would like to introduce myself with a few words. I was a conventional beekeeper, like supposedly most of you are, and I learned conventional beekeeping from my grandfather. And shortly after that, I started looking for answers. Especially in Germany, treatment is very big. So you're obliged by the law to treat your bees. And I was doing that, and I saw how cruel this is. So using formic acid and finding torn out antennas underneath the mesh bottom, and so I was looking for solutions, and I was starting basically doing my research. So I was looking for alternatives to the treatment, and I was then finding little spiders called book scorpions who are able to feed on varroa mites, and I was interested in them. So I started to integrate them into the hives, and I was working on that project for a few years. And after that, Jürgen Tautz hired me. So Professor Jürgen Tautz, some of you might know him, is very big in Germany at least, and he hired me to work for him, and I was assigned for studying the life of wild living honeybees in tree cavities, and I had to compare them with bees living in boxes and identify the possible side effects on bee health. And so I started that research. I was literally sitting on the tree for a few years. I did that for 4 years, and I was studying wild bees, and I compared them to the bees that we had in boxes. And when I was doing that, I found a lot of dramatic differences, and I stopped being a beekeeper by that research, basically. So I found okay, I need a change. I don't want to do this anymore. So I became an eco-terrorist, let's say that. No, I'm just kidding. But it's I just stopped beekeeping and started preservation. And so some of my during my lecture, I will use some very straight language. Germans are always very straight in words. It doesn't mean that I'm rude or something. I don't mean to offend anyone. It's all about the topic. And today we are going to focus on the nectar competition and what we can say about that. Regarding the research that we have done and the research that is available in the internet. And I will start the presentation right now. I think we will have a few minutes of discussion afterwards, and I think I really have to hurry because we have a lot of pages that we want to go through, and so I don't want to let you wait any longer. If I miss any words, please bear with me. And, I'm just German, and sometimes I really have to think of the right word, probably. So please excuse that. Okay, so the topic is this morning how modern beekeeping enhances nectar competition and contributes to the species extinction of wild pollinators. That is a topic which is very much discussed, and there's a lot of fights going on here in Germany about that matter. And so we try to look at the scientific research and what we can say about that. So first of all, I want to give you a brief information about population dynamics. So population dynamics is about the development of a certain species in a certain location, and so all populations are subdued to these dynamics. And the main factors of a population growth is, of course, rates of reproduction. We have the death rate and the capacity limit. So the capacity limit is defined by density-independent factors such as climatic conditions, pesticides, natural disasters. It's everything that can affect a population but cannot be affected by a population itself. So the second one is the density-dependent factors such as habitat, housing. In our example is tree cavities, food availability, number of individuals, so that's social stress, disease, or epidemics. And we do have interspecific and intraspecific competition. That means interspecific means that honeybees compete with other species, and intraspecific means honeybees compete between themselves. So the colonies between themselves. And so a colony or a population can never grow without any limit. There are always limits of habitat, of nutrition, and of course, the other factors that we have. So these factors literally define the capacity of the growth of a population. So first of all, we have to think about, and there's very little data on that. What is species appropriate for honeybees regarding the housing and regarding the density? So Tom Seeley has done some research on the matter, and he has given, or he's provided different volumes to swarms, and he found out that in between 30 and 60 liters, the swarms will prefer that volume. So if you let them choose between 10 liters and 30 liters, a swarm will always choose the 30 liters. And if you let them choose, between 10 liters and 100 liters, the swarm will go into 10 liter volume. And it's all based on the energy level and the energy that is being needed to heat up or achieve the brood temperature inside. And so we can ask the species, what is species appropriate to you? If we offer them different volumes and we see what choice they take. And this is a very important factor, because many of our hives that we've been using or that we are using today have a very high volume of more than 100 liters. And you can say that if none of the swarms would go in by themselves in such a volume, if they would always avoid such a volume, then this behavior is based in natural selection. So every colony, or most of the colonies throughout their evolution of millions of years, who have gone into tree cavities with such a high volume, were not able to reproduce, or were selected by natural selection, so died. So a too high volume is a selectional factor. Then we have the natural density in the Arctic forest. So he has done research on that in a time span of 40 years. And throughout these 40 years, the density in the forest was very stable. It was always around 1 honeybee colony per square kilometer. So if we place boxes on the ground, and this is another selectional factor, the ground, because honeybees, if they can choose, if you let swarms choose, will always go up and choose the geometry that you offer them which is a few meters high instead of the one that is standing on the ground. And this is, again, a selection factor which has been created, or that behavior has been developed in natural selection. So all the bee colonies who were, going into tree cavities that were on the ground or close to the ground didn't very likely not to survive. So the ground itself is a selection factor as well. I will go into detail into that matter into one of the other lectures that I'm going to give. What is, in detail, what is the selection factor of the ground. And so if we place all the boxes close to each other on the ground, we have a very artificial condition. So this is not species appropriate, and this causes itself a lot of problems to the bees, which is convenient to us beekeepers maybe, but it's very, very artificial for the colonies itself. A high density causes various problems. So it's like food shortage, competition, displacement or elimination of other species, extinction of other species if there is no way of, or there is no way that they can displace or they can move into another area or something. So of course we have robbery and elimination of other honeybee colonies. So there is a food shortage and they don't have a lot of storage. They get aggressive towards other colonies and they will rob them and they will get their food out. They will start a war, literally. By doing that, infections, diseases, and epidemics are very likely to spread. If one colony is weak, it's infected with an epidemic or a disease, and it's being robbed by another one. So this is normally how these diseases were spread throughout the population. And of course, there's a housing competition. So there are not a lot of tree cavities at the moment or in our landscape nowadays. So this is another defining factor of the population growth or the population dynamic. So if we look at the numbers, I didn't find any numbers from London in the internet. But if we stay in Germany here and we see that in Germany, I live close to Hamburg. So I was born in Hamburg, and the density of bee colonies in Hamburg is 7.3 colonies per square kilometer. So that is 6 more than you would find in the Arnold Forest in natural conditions. And in Berlin, we have up to 23 colonies per square kilometer and an average of 17.3 colonies per square kilometer in the city. And this is creating a lot of problems, which I will refer to later in the presentation. So it's 16 times more than what is natural in the forest. I as well do a lot of research on wild colonies. I have a monitoring program called the Beekeeping Revolution, and we have it online, and we monitor up to 200 wild colonies at the moment. So we have the density in the forest is very comparable to the one that we see in the Arnold Forest. So there's another one, there's another aspect that we need to talk about. That's polylecty or oligolecty. And that means that many wild pollinators are specialized for certain flowers and plants. And this is sometimes used as an argument that honeybees do not interfere with other pollinators because they are specialized. So if the honeybee was specialized, then this argumentation would be true. But honeybees are true super generalistics. So the most generalistic species of all bees that we have, and there's a citation that says, in direct comparison to the super generalistic honeybees, all other bee species would have to be classified as specialized. So this is why we don't use them as a scale, because then we wouldn't have, another differentiation. So the honeybees, they have a very high operating range. They can, forage up to 10 kilometers in a radius. And that is extreme, of course. Normally they will, circle in a radius of up to 3 kilometers to, to collect the nectar and pollen. Wild bees normally only have a few hundred meters. So honeybees are very superior regarding their range. Other factor gives them advantage about wild bees are state forming, speed of development. So the colony or the amount of bees in that state that are being produced, the brood mass is very fast, and so they have a huge range. They do stockpiling. So if the weather turns bad or there are a few weeks of bad weather, they can just feed on their storage, wouldn't kill them. They have a huge foraging capacity. So they can, due to their communication, they can inform others, and they can bring in liters of nectar a day. So they have a very huge capacity of foraging. And of course, their generalism, that they are not really picky. Yeah, they just go for anything that they can find. So in conclusion, one must say that in most cases, specialization does not protect any wild bees from getting displaced or eliminated by honeybees in a nectar competition situation. Honeybees are naturally superior to wild bees, and even without being fed sugar water. So, let's take a look at the cavity, the tree cavity itself. That is the habitat that honeybees or Western honeybees have developed in or evolved in throughout thousands of years at least. And we've done some climatic measurements inside those cavities in order to try to understand what conditions they would face in a tree cavity and compare those conditions to ordinary hives or the hives that we are using. And there we found a lot of very, very interesting factors that are all affecting the bees very much. And to start with it, so if you have a tree cavity, then you usually have a very small diameter in the inside. And most of the cavities where bees are able to survive have their entrance in the downer position. So in the downer third. And the honeybees will, of course, have their intake, and throughout the wintertime, they will sit on the border of the intake, and they will digest honey. By digesting honey, they will create a lot of water. So when they digest honey and they produce warm air or just heat, they will produce CO2 and water. And from every kilo that they digest, approximately 700 milliliters of water will just evaporate into the atmosphere in the cavity. So then you have the propolis layer, and the propolis layer leaves or is open to these gaseous molecules of water, and the fibers, the open fibers of the wood, would then absorb the humidity. So this is a function of the wood itself. If it's dry outside, the wood will get dry, of course. If it's getting humid outside, the wood will absorb humidity. And so it's reacting all the time to the outer conditions. And by doing that, the wood is able to stabilize the climate within the cavity. So if we have, let's say, a certain amount of humidity inside and it's getting dry outside, the wood is going to evaporate the humidity into the cavity, back into the cavity. So the humidity stays very stable. Same thing with the temperature. Normally you have very thick sides of massive wood, and wood combines three very important physical factors. The first is it is a very good insulation. So the next is it has a heat capacity. It can store heat. And the last one, it can absorb humidity and emit humidity. So if we take those factors and we do climatic measurement inside these cavities, we see that the climatic condition or the temperature, which is being shown here, is absolutely stable. So this was a measurement that has been done in March, and we had cold days. So it was like 12 degrees in the daytime, and it was -2 degrees in the night. So the temperature dropped to -degrees. And you see, this is a sensor that was close to the bee ball. And we see that the bees are reacting by heating up, but they don't have to heat up as much as the temperature is falling. This is because of the fact that the cavity itself, the wood, but also the storage is storing or has a heat capacity. So everything around the bees is warm. If the temperature drops, it has a function like radiation. So the bees are not forced to react immediately, or they do have to. They don't have to heat up as much as the temperature falls at the outside. And the result is that they easily stabilize the climate around the brood field. There's no interference in the brood field area. It's very, very stable conditions. So if we measure the amount of honey that is being consumed throughout 6 months of wintertime in those conditions, we find that the amount of honey that is being used by a colony, if we clear it out of the humidity, of course we measure the humidity of the wood, and we have to adjust the loss of weight to it, then we will have a consumption of only 2.4 kilos of honey throughout 6 months of wintertime. So it's a tenth of what we see approximately in the boxes. So there's another factor that I would like to show you. If you are blowing wood, I don't know whether you have ever done this, but if you're blowing wood and you put some soap on the wood, then you can see how open these fibers of the wood really are. So you can blow through a massive chunk of wood without any problem. If you put on some humidity, like a drop of water here, it's going to be absorbed by the fibers instantly. If you do that on the sides, the drop will stay there. So no wine gets out of the barrel, right? So, and in a tree cavity, of course, we have all these open fibers. And because of the fact that the tree cavity is not straight, we do have the open fibers even at the sides. And we don't have anything of that in our hives usually. So if we look at the energy flow and the climatic stability of tree cavities and boxes, then this is a thermal image. You would sure recognize that there's a lot of heat loss going on right here. Everything that is glooming needs to be compensated by the bees. They need to feed on more storage. They need to heat up more. They are wearing out more quickly. They are dying more quickly. So the lifespan will diminish. And so we wear them out with those boxes. And of course, they cannot really create a stable climate. If we look at some measurements there, we can say that if you have a well-insulated box, like with lightweight insulation, we still see that it's hemp inside. It's 20 centimeters of hemp. It's 10 centimeters of insulation at the sides. It's basically like our houses, right? And so we've done a climatic measurement in those boxes, and we saw that the line of temperature always follows the line of temperature outside. So every peak that we have, you will see in the inside. So it is very dependent on the outer weather as well. It's very different to what we see in tree cavities. And this is due to the factor that a lightweight insulation does not have any heat capacity, cannot really help the bees to control the temperature. But it's very, it's like styrofoam that we use here, plastic hives, or even lightweight material has no heat capacity. This is why they cannot stabilize the climatic conditions within. But because of the fact that they have developed throughout millions of years in stable climatic conditions, that they always try to adjust to it. So they always try to have a linear climate inside. And by doing that, they will waste a lot of energy. They will waste a lot of nectar. So a box like that will heat up and will cool down as you would expect it. And if they are exposed in the weather conditions, or even worse, on a roof, not on a field, but on a roof somewhere in a city, then these dependencies will be enhanced. Let me check that. So if we look at a straw scab, an old scab, we see that these scab is, this is the outer temperature, day and night curve that we have. So we have these changes. And we see that the temperature inside the scab, that's the blue line, we see as it's pretty stable. So it's not as stable as a tree cavity, of course, because the mass is missing. So the heat capacity is missing a little bit. But if you enhance that by any coatings or something, then you will find a climate or climatic conditions that are going into the direction of tree cavities. So, and we have kept bees for at least thousands or hundreds of years in these scabs, and they are pretty close to the climatic conditions that we would see in tree cavities. And if you again look at, this is a tree cavity simulation that we are using at the moment to restore or to replace the missing tree cavities. We have the same conditions that you would see in a natural cavity. It's very stable from the climatic conditions, no matter what the outer temperature is doing. So the climatic conditions are of, the utmost importance for the whole biology of bees, but this is another topic that I will refer to in one of the other lectures. There is a new study that has come out from the Entomological Society of America, and there are some citations that I would like to show to you. It's the title is "The Old Bee House Study Deems Hive Boxes Drafty Inefficient." So it's a wooden box based on a 19th century design that leaks and gains heat just like you would expect it would. And occasionally someone comes along and takes away part of the insulation, the honey. Of course, the honey has a form of insulation. It has a heat capacity, of course. So honeybees just can't win. This is what we see in the climatic measurements that we have done. So even though they try to get a stable climate, they are helpless. They can't really achieve that. And he said, furthermore, he said, commonly used wooden hive boxes are designed for human first. That's true. So we have the frames, we have the boxes, we put them on the ground. That's all convenient. But the design screamed of thermal inefficiencies. So you can see that with a thermal camera, everything that's being lost needs to be reproduced, needs to be, taken in again. So all literally millions of hours of labor time will go to compensation behavior of boxes in an ordinary hive that we are using, which are in normal conditions used for natural behaviors that will allow them to survive independently from any treatment or whatsoever. So, and finally, he said, it's really time, it really is time we start looking to optimize pollination systems and services from the ground, rather than using a 160-year-old honey collection system. So keeping bees in boxes is convenient, but at the same time wasting vast amounts of nectar resources. And I found an article in The Guardian, I think. It said, honeybees are voracious. And I don't agree, it's us. So, because if a honeybee colony only uses very little amounts of honey, and, you know, of course, the volume is very limited in the tree cavity. So everything is limited, right? They cannot grow, they cannot expand. There's no one putting a box on top. There's no increase of the brood. And so they can only take in what finds place. And there is a research of Jürgen Tautz himself. He calculated the range of honey intake annually and calculated this with 100 to 200,000 foraging bees. And he says, you know, the minimum amount would be 30 kilos and the maximum amount that one can calculate is 800 kilos. This is, of course, way too much. It's in his book, Phänomen Honigbiene. I think it's also available in English. So if we look at the data that we have from the energy level or the energy flow throughout these geometries, we have, again, very little data on that, but some we could gain. And so let's take a look at this list. So tree cavity has an optimal volume for swarms. As you know, swarms would go for 30 to 60 liters. It is normally very well insulated and is made, of course, out of massive wood. So the climatic stability is very well. And so the other tree cavity simulation that we have is the Schiffer tree. It's a non-profit. You know, it's a non-profit product. So don't think that I'm going to sell you something here. And we have literally, we build tree cavities. So we have a solid block of open fiber wood at the top and at the bottom, like 30 centimeters at the top and 15 centimeters in the bottom. There is no interference. You cannot get anything out of it. It's not meant to be a part of beekeeping or a beute or a hive to get anything out of it. It's only meant to, to replace the missing tree cavities that we have. And it's being, it's being occupied by the dozens of swarms. So we have them throughout Europe now, approximately 500 of those tree cavities we have in the trees far away from the ground. And 1/3 of it have been occupied by natural swarms. So it's very massive. It's, again, it's like a natural tree cavity, and it's very well insulated. And we have hired an engineer's bureau office, and they calculated the energy flow in these cavities compared to those boxes. And they said that, the lowest amount, or, the lowest calculation would be that a box like that would use 12 times as much of energy or nectar as a hive like that. But more likely, it's like 15 to 20 times. So we have these old scabs, and we know from the Schiffer tree, again, let's add that it has only used 2.4 kilos of honey in 6 months of wintertime. And the colony had a size of a colony in a single box. So the scab, again, it is very close to a natural cavity. There is no corners, there is no condensation in the corners, no mold shredding. There is a thorough propolization. That's the outer immune system of the bees. And it's kind of stable in the climatic conditions, and the energy use of a bee colony throughout the whole year would be in between 15 and 30 kilograms. If you use insulated single boxes, then and raise the volume a little bit, so we can also say that the insulation is good, and we can see that it's recognizable in the climatic conditions. So it's not very dependent, or it's comparable to a straw scab. It's a bit more but it's not comparable to one of these. So if we use these thin-walled wooden boxes and we add boxes on top, we later end up with a volume of more than 140 liters. That means this hive will at least use 12 times as much energy as bees in a natural cavity in a skep or even in a Schiffer tree. So there's no insulation, or it's very insufficient. The dependency of the outer weather is extreme, and there's no climatic stability at all. And of course, if it goes wider, if it goes bigger, if it goes flatter or something, these climatic conditions or the dependency to the outer weather will increase. And Jürgen Tautz has done research on those hives, and he has calculated all the nectar foragers throughout one year with technical equipment. And then he calculated that this hive has taken in up to 300 kilos of honey in that year. So that was, most of it was being used for regulating the temperature. So it's being burned. It's what you see with the thermal images. Everything that goes out needs to get back in. And you need thousands of bees for it. You need an increased brood for it. You increase the varroa mites. You waste a lot of natural resources. And at the end, you get a very tiny proportion of what has run through the hive throughout the whole time into the glass. So if we compare that, we could say that a skep is like, being in a fisher boat and having, doing some fishing by yourself. And the other skeps that we have invented, or we have, we have optimized for us humans, are getting bigger and bigger and easier to manipulate the natural behavior, or break the natural behavior, and to do or to enforce on the bees what we want them to do is a lot of intake, or produce a lot of intake for us. And of course, the bigger the hive gets, the more nectar is being wasted. So you won't see only a fraction of the honey at the end of the year that has run through the hive. And of course, this has effects on the whole environment of the bees where they're standing, or those hives where they're standing. Now we have some, the vice president of the professional beekeepers in Germany. This is Bernhard Häufel. He has, invented the three queen hives. So he puts 2 or 3 queens inside, uses like mesh to separate them from each other so that only the worker bees can run through. And he wanted to increase his harvest, of course, and he's doing that and says, okay, I would recommend that, not because you harvest 500 kilos of honey or anything, but because you can guarantee that a hive like that, even though if you have one weak queen or something, will eventually produce a harvest of a single very good hive. So, but where does all the other nectar go? So where does it go? It's all heat loss. It's all, going into the energy flow of the whole factory. And so it's wasting hundreds and hundreds of liters of nectar. Those hives, certainly more than 1 ton of nectar each year. Even though if you consider that Jürgen Tautz has found out that 300 kilos went through a Sonderhive, then you would calculate that 3 or 4 times to get the amount of nectar. So you have an idea of how much nectar really goes through a hive like this. If we are traveling with the bees and we are, placing them somewhere somewhere on a field, of course, we cannot stay there forever because the surrounding is not providing enough energy for them to stay forever. So what we do is we have an overshoot. Okay, we can these these pallets were put here with 4 standard hives. It was 64 pieces in total, and the daily energy demand that we have calculated with average numbers would be 79 kilograms of honey. That's 237 liters of nectar, and so that would be 64.8 kilogram of pure sugar. So if you have an extensive landscape, because there is scientific research of how much a landscape can produce, how much sugar it can produce per day or per hectare, then if it is extensive, it's a bit more that the landscape can produce in average. Then you would have you would need 215 hectares in order to meet the demands, the daily demands of those hives standing here. If it was intensive around those bees, then you would have to have 383 hectares only to feed these colonies, with 0% being left for the wild colonies. So what's going to happen is that they will go there, they will use their machines, they come with a truck, they will place them on the ground, they will wait until they don't gain any weight or they don't gain any weight anymore. And they will pick them up and bring them into the next area. And what they do, or what is happening in the surrounding, is that they will displace or even eliminate the wild colonies or the wild bees around that area, because they are deeply digging in the pockets of the whole nectar system. And remember that the wild bees only have a range of a few hundred meters, so they are dependent of a permanent food source in their environment. And if it's not there, they will literally starve to death. So these problems are further enhanced by the very unnatural conditions that we would face or that we would see in the city. So we have a microclimate in the forest. That means if we are in a forest on a sunny day, it's much colder than it's much more stable. The climatic conditions are very stable. And think of the stability of the climatic conditions in a tree cavity, or here in a tree cavity simulation, compared to a box. That is analog to the comparison of a whole forest and a city. So the forest will absorb the sunlight with the leaves and produce sugar and do photosynthesis, and they will evaporate. So all the leaves of one single tree will evaporate hundreds of liters a day of water. So there's a microclimate. It never gets as hot. It never gets as cold. It's never very windy. So it's very protected. And there is a very, very stable microclimate that does not follow the heat curve and the day and night curve that we would see in the city, for example. Of course, the city absorbs a lot of humidity. You know how hot it is in the summertime in a heat day in the city. And, so these problems are further enhanced. So you have these thin-walled boxes standing on the roofs, directly exposed to that weather conditions, very unstable climatic conditions inside, and very harsh conditions at the outside, and the problems will increase. I went on a roof this summer because I wanted to measure the temperature and see how much it is. And I could say that I'm sorry that I didn't get to translate that, but I will tell you what this means. And this is a roof in the school where I'm working. I'm also working in a school, and we a few years ago we had beehives on that roof, right? So like everyone, and I used temperatures or scales here. So and I could measure the temperature in the shadow and outside the shadow. And I did the same thing a few hundred meters away, behind the gymnasium that we have here in a very overshadowed area where we have a lot of trees, and it's much colder here. And then I jumped into my car and I drove into a forest, a just stone throw away from the city. And I went into the forest and I measured the temperature there. So the result was that on the roof, it was like in the sun, it was almost 50 degrees, and it was extremely dry. So I ruined my scales when I was doing that. I couldn't use them anymore. I had two other ones that were able to cope with this, but I ruined my scale. So in the shadow here, it was 40 degrees. In the sun, it was 48 degrees. And here around the corner, it was 10 degrees lower the temperature. It was only 38 degrees. And in the shadow, it was 28 degrees. So compared to 40 degrees, there is a significant difference that we can see here. So the difference from exposed to the sunlight is 10 degrees, and in the shadow or in the shade, it was 12 degrees. So in the forest, however, we had only 26 degrees in the sunlight, not 48. That means minus 22 degrees. And in the shade, we had only 22 degrees. That means minus 80 degrees. So, taking into account that every instability of the climate causes a reaction by the beehive, whether they cool or they will heat up. So you can just, think of how much the outer conditions will affect the behavior of the bees themselves. And I would recommend to anyone to sit on a roof in a sunny day and stay there as long as you can bear, and think about it, and then take that chair, go into a forest, and have that experience of what's the difference. So if we go into into Berlin, if we look at Berlin and we look at the city, we can say that, of course, there are a lot of problems caused by honeybees these days, because the density is an average 17.3 colonies per square kilometers, and most of them are sitting on the roofs in very wide boxes, like bath tube-like boxes. And the sun is, exposed to the sun, exposed to the wind, exposed to anything, thin-walled, and they are, literally grilling or in the sunlight there. And so the whole area is very much covered with honeybee colonies. And because of the fact that many bee colonies do not find anything to feed on in the area around the city, so in the agricultural landscape after the after the time where we harvested grapes or whatever. So thousands of beekeepers will come into the city and place their bees there every year after they have, so after they have done their harvest around the city on the fields. So these black dots that you see here are the last resorts of wild bees in Berlin. We have about 300 endangered species in Berlin, and these black spots should be black all over, but these black spots are withering away. And the main factor why they are withering away is because there is a huge nectar competition in the city. So we will come to that in a moment. So the idea was, if we get a circle of 3 kilometers, so that's the red circle, if we get a protection area of the dots where we have the last resorts of these wild colonies, or the wild solitary bees, in order to protect them from the honeybees, then there would be literally no place in Berlin where you could do beekeeping anymore. If we would take species protection of wild bees seriously, this is how it would look like. So let's take a look at the red list. We have 560 wild bees still existing in Germany. 60% of them are endangered. 12.9% are close to extinction. 13.5% are considered to be lost. Between 1980 and 2011, 38 species died out. The density in Berlin, as I said, is an average 17.3 colonies per square kilometer. And every year, thousands of new beekeepers are being educated and are putting their boxes on the roofs of the city. So we have a very huge hype of beekeeping. And so all these people want to get their share out of this system. But, doesn't make any sense, because the amount of nectar that is being produced from a city is limited. So how can an unlimited and unregulated number of beekeepers be right or sustainable? I don't think it is. So the range radius of 3 kilometers of a beehive means that if you have 70.3 kilometers colonies per square kilometer, that means every one of those, or every colony, flies a radius of 3 kilometers. That means it forages in a surface of 28 square kilometers. So if you calculate that with the amount of beehives in that area where the hive is foraging in, then you would find 484 other colonies in the same territory. That means every square meter of the city is being pollinated and foraged by 484 honeybee colonies, mostly in boxes, exposed to harsh weather conditions on the roofs. So this is why the black spots are withering away. Bumblebees are already starving to death by the thousands around June, lying on the streets and starving to death. And just compare that to the idea of 17 fishing boats per square kilometer of the ocean. And every fishing boat would have a net of 28 square kilometers. Then every square meter of ocean would be, clutched with 484 nets piled on top of each other from the time the sun goes up until the time the sun goes down, at least when the weather is fine. So one can easily think of that this is, causing problems. And I was really curious if one could calculate that. And we tried to do this. So there's a PhD that is helping in my nonprofit organization, and I was sitting with him together and I said, let's calculate that. Let's try to calculate that. And we did. So there are official numbers of how much surface in Berlin is grassland, or is just forest, or is water surface. So we used that official numbers, and we used the numbers that we know from the scientific research, and we calculated what it means to the city that we have a density that high. And here's a reminder. So Tom Seeley has done his research of the density in the Yarmouth forest throughout 40 years, and the estimated density of colonies was always around 1 colony per square kilometer. So taking into account that these colonies are sitting in tree cavities, and a tree cavity is using at least 12 times less energy, you can say that every box hive that is sitting on a roof has the energy flow of at least 12 tree cavities. So this is another factor that you need to keep in mind. So there's another scientific research from Langla and his colleagues, and they found out how much sugar can be produced by a landscape. And they found these, there's this list in their publication, and you can say that, in these months, you have that amount, so 105 grams per hectare a day, up to 409 grams per hectare a day in average. And so we calculated that, and we just pretended to have, or we took the average and calculated that for 8 months. So we say, okay, this is the average of what Berlin can produce in sugar. Of course, there's always limitation to such a calculation, but it should give you an idea where we are at the moment. So in intensive landscapes, the amount of nectar is, altogether or in average is lower than that, because you do have a mass harvest, of course, but after that, nothing is going to grow on these fields. So in average, it's worse than in extensive landscapes. So the nectar supply. Good. If you then take, average, consumption of honey per colony, and we calculate that into that list, we can say that, okay, if we have 1 colony per square kilometer in, then it will only use 0.2% of the nectar production that Berlin can provide. If we have 3 colonies per square kilometer, it would be like 0.6%. So that's not a lot. If we, if we then use, or if you then calculate that with managed colonies, because they have a much higher nectar or honey consumption because of the energy flow, then they would use, 7.7% of all the sugar that is possible or that is being produced in Berlin when you have a density of three colonies per square kilometer. And so you can, increase the numbers or the density. And this is the calculation with an extensive landscape. That means the landscapes provides more sugar than if it was intensive. So now we are here, or somewhere around here, between 15 and 20, and we can say that the overall consumption of these colonies in the city, it's only one species, right? So one species out of 550. And that means the one species is now using between 40 and 50% of all the sugar that can be produced by all surfaces in Berlin because of the high density that we have. So in normal condition, it would be underneath 1%, right? This is here in the red line. So if you calculate the same with an intensive landscape, because not all of Berlin is extensive, of course, you do have the parks, you do have parks that are not producing a lot of sugar. So matters, for example, that are being cut down, or even playgrounds, or so it would be a mixture of intensive and extensive. But if you would do the same calculation with an intensive landscape, the density in Berlin, if we would calculate up to 20 beehives per square kilometer, would use up to 90% of all the resources that can be produced by all the plants in Berlin. So we are somewhere between that, and it should be underneath 1%, so that the honeybee is 1 out of 550 species, so it is 0.18% in percentage in comparison to that, and demands up to 1% of all the sugar that is being produced by the landscape. That would be fine for the other 550 colonies. If we go higher than that, then we will definitely dig in the pockets of the wild pollinators, of course. So that is the same, but here you see how much is left in percentage of the sugar compared to the density for the wild colonies. And if it was extensive, we would see that in the density of Berlin, we would have 61% to 48% left for the wild bees for the 550 other species. If we go here and calculate the same with an extensive amount of sugar or extensive landscape, that produces less sugar, then we would be here that only 32% or even 10% are being left for all the other 550 species. That means in average numbers, the light blue areas, that is the amount that we are now claiming for honeybee or for beekeeping in Berlin. And that is what is being left for 550 other species. In Berlin, we do have only 300 known endangered species, but anyhow, these are the numbers that you can, rely on. So what does the scientific research say? There are a lot of papers on scientific research papers that we could find, and some of them I have just translated, but most of them are in English anyway. So, and they say high honeybee abundances reduce wild bee abundances on flowers in the city of Munich, here in Germany. So we found clear support that high honeybee densities result in exploitative competition at numerous types of flowers. We found a significant negative relationship between the densities of honeybees and those of flower visiting wild bees, almost regardless of the flower type. So that is because they are generalistic, right? So honeybees take literally anything that they can feed on. These numbers suggest that honeybees must use a substantial proportion of floral resources at any one time and place, as our data show food competition occurred not only at flowers providing both nectar, sugars, and pollen, but also at flowers that provide only pollen. Then there was another research that said experimental evidence that honeybees depress wild insects densities in flowering crop. That was Lindström, and this citation, adding honeybee hives to flowering oilseed rape fields reduced to overall density of wild insects in the crop compared with control fields without honeybee hives. So even in these oilseed rape fields, you can see that wild insects will be affected when you put these honeybee hives into them. We found negative effects on all wild insects densities when analyzed separately: bumblebees, solitary wild bees, marsh flies, hoover flies, other flies, and other flying and flower visiting insects. And at least there was another one. It's Johann Neumeier. It's a German guy. He has done some research in the south of Germany, and he says the influence of honeybees on nectar supply and I don't know how to spell that. Sorry, flower visitors. That means the wild pollinators, right? So honeybees significantly reduce the resource availability of many plant species. Only one of 11 species of plants frequently visited by honeybees was not affected. Okay, so all the others were, the resources of those flowers were heavily used by the honeybees. Then there's another one, or another research that says collateral effects of beekeeping, impacts on pollen nectar resources in wild bee communities, from 2016. All these researches are not very old. And they found out that when you have a density of 3.5 hives per square kilometer, the wild bee community is being affected. So there you see this matches with the numbers that Tom Seeley found in the Arnold Forest, where no one is interfering, where the density was very stable at 1 beehive per square kilometer throughout 40 years of time. So probably that is the right amount of bees. So probably you have other forests that deliver more sugar, that have more cavities, that are able to have a bigger population or carry a bigger population or of honeybees. But this is matching by the numbers. So then we have Paul Westrich. So he has written the most important book that we have in Germany about wild bees, called Wildbienen Deutschlands. And on page 314, he is referring to the nectar competition, and he says honeybees compete heavily with the wild bees if no alternative food sources bloom, to which polylactic species can switch. That means species that can switch to other flowers. They're not specified. So if you have specified species, of course, they cannot switch to anything. The competitive pressure by the honeybees has a catastrophic effect up to complete disappearance of individual wild bee species. And then there's another research that combines all the other researches that have been done on that matter, and that is, do managed bees have negative effects on wild bees? A systematic review of the literature, and that is an article that is really nice to have, because of course, you will find other studies that say, okay, putting honeybees in a certain location is a benefit to all the other pollinators. But we really have to take a close look how these studies are being set up and who has funded those researches, and moreover, where are they, and so on. And we can rely on the majority, I think. So the majority of reviewed studies report negative effects on managed bees. Of studies examining competition, results were highly variable, with 53% reporting negative effects. So, and only 19% report mixed effects. And so that is a clear language, I think. And there's a video which I want to skip, but I want to recommend to you. It's on YouTube, why we're saving the wrong bees. So I really need to get forward here, because we have a lot of pages left. So where do we stand? In 1950, the diversity of, the botanic and faunistic diversity was huge. That was the blue part here. And this has changed to today. So this has turned upside down, basically. Now, the botanic diversity is very low, and this is the faunistic diversity and the remaining population size of wild animals, basically wildlife. So, a review of 73 publications report significant decrease in numbers of insects. Habitat and environmental changes are identified as the main factors. Especially intensive agriculture and the use of pesticides have caused insects to disappear. And the conclusion is clear. Unless we change our way of producing food, insects as a whole will go down the path of extinction in a few decades. The repercussions this will have for the planet's ecosystem are catastrophic, to say at least, because all the ecosystems, of course, depend on the insects. So, in conclusion, we must change to permaculture or regenerative agriculture. The last resorts of wild pollinators in the cities, where no pesticides or agriculture does exist, must not be exploited by a steadily increasing and unregulated and unlimited number of beekeepers. But how important are honeybees in agriculture? So, because it's always used as an argument that we need the densities of honeybees in order to have the pollination that we need in order to feed us, but this is untrue. So let's take a look at the numbers. And there are numerous scientific research studies that show that wild bees in common altogether are more important in pollination services in comparison to the honeybees. And a study on 41 crops grown worldwide has shown that only in 14% of all the cases, honeybees could increase the yields when they were placed in high abundances on those fields. So in Great Britain, that is very important and interesting. Of course, in 1980, in England, you had honeybee pollination about 70% of your agriculture products that you have. And in 2011, there was another research coming out, and it showed that the honeybee pollination has decreased to only 34%, despite 54% increase in crop yields. That means the majority of your crop yields these days are pollinated by the diversity of pollination insects. So, and another study has shown that pollination declines significantly when wild bees are absent or in lower numbers, despite abundant honeybee populations. And that shows that the honeybee cannot do it alone. Their importance is often overstated, especially in Germany by the beekeeping organizations like the German Imkerbund, the Deutsche Imkerbund, and so on. And they claim that 80% or 85% of all crops in Germany are pollinated by honeybees, and that is just untrue. Only a rich and above all balanced diversity of pollinating insects can ensure stable and sustainable food production. Yeah, and yeah. So what do we demand? I mean, I have a non-profit organization, as I said, and we are now demanding certain things. And this might be offensive for some of you, but I really want to underline that I don't mean to offend anyone in the room. It's not about you. It's about the system that we have set up and the resources. And beekeeping is the last resort, I think. It's the last agricultural system that is unlimited and unregulated. And that can't be right, because we have a limitation of nectar production, and so we cannot have an unlimited number of beekeepers or hives in the cities. It doesn't make any sense, right? So beekeeping must be strictly regulated, after the sustainability principle. So if it's not sustainable, we cannot do it, right? So feeding honeybees should be forbidden. Why do I say that? Because, if you in Germany, if you kill a wild, let's say, bumblebee hive, because it's living in the ground and you want to build a terrace or something and you kill it, then it costs up to 50,000 euros of fine, or even 5 years in prison, because they are highly protected by the law. But if you place like 70 hives into your garden and you are causing like dozens of bumblebee hives starving to death in the surrounding area, then you will make money out of it, because you are selling their food as your own, as your property. And, can't be right. And I mean, for thousands of years, we have kept bees in different styles. Yeah, Let's take the scat forever, or the ancient hives. Of course, you didn't get as much out of it, but that's the point, right? So there was no feeding sugar, until after the war, because there was no sugar that we could feed to the bees. So we only took out what the bees had left at the springtime, and so we were kind of in the same system. Yeah, we didn't exceed the system with a number of bee colonies that were too high that the surrounding area couldn't feed them. And if we do this, if we overcrowd an area with bee colonies, and we have an overshoot use, then the result is, if we feed those colonies sugar, the starvation and the dying will intensify on the wild bees, right? Because no one is going to feed the wild bees. And the next point is, beekeeping organizations in Germany are considered to be a benefit to society. So it's non-profit, and it's a benefit to society, and we reject that. So because beekeeping is not a benefit to the society, nor it is a benefit for nature or the environment. And I think the advantages in taxes and everything that they have, because they are considered to be a benefit to everyone, should be stopped. So the next point is, intensive beekeeping and traveling with high numbers of beehives should be forbidden, because you are literally sucking out the nectar out of those areas, and then you go to another area, and what you leave is just burned soil, right? So of course it does affect in a wide scale the wild bees and the wild pollinators. So next point is man-made queen breeding with a goal to adapt honeybees to our needs, to our human needs, should be forbidden. Yeah, make them more soft, make them more eager to collect honey, make them less swarming, and so on. Doesn't make any sense to the bees themselves. Doesn't make any sense to the environment. Doesn't make any sense for the ecosystems, nor for the future of our next generations. So we should have only as many beehives as the environment is able to support. And if it's not able to support those beehives, they have to starve. Let's, at the end, that's population dynamics. This has been functional for millions of years. We cannot take the honeybees out of the system of population dynamics, feed them, and save, or just what's the word for it? Keep the problem alive, for the other colonies. So, and I think there must be a legal obligation of beekeeping associations for holistic education. That means that the beekeepers shouldn't be only informed about how to manage the hive, how to get the most out of it, how to squeeze, queens, or cut the brood out, or just enhance the production. They should really know what they are doing and the effects of the environment. And of course, there should be licenses. I mean, I cannot buy a fishing boat and get on the ocean and get as much out as I want to. It's all regulated, right? But not in beekeeping. So in beekeeping, everyone can have as much as he wants to and get out of this as much as he wants to. And at least honey is a luxury product and no Lebensmittel. Lebensmittel is a German word that means you need that stuff to live. But no one needs honey to live. It's a true luxury product. No one is going to die if we don't have any honey. But many species are going to die if we exceed the consumption of honey, which we have already done, because about 1/4 of all the honey which is on the market is not true honey, because the market is bigger than what nature can produce, even today. And what is really important, no honeybee is to blame for the situation. Honeybees play an integral part in our ecosystem if densities and living conditions are natural. So it's not the honeybee that causes these problems, it's us. And we need to hurry up, but we really want to have an agricultural reform, the last chance for us, or what we see as permaculture. So subsidies must be redirected to regenerative agriculture. Pesticides should be forbidden. They are obsolete in regenerative agriculture or permaculture. And we need to reform the agricultural education system, because the permaculture is not part of it until today. And permaculture should be a school subject within the framework of sustainable environmental education, which is already an obligation in our ordinary schools. So the population must be educated and activated that nutritional and climatic problems like global warming can be solved if we shift to another type of agriculture. And even I don't know whether you know this, but I would really recommend you the movie Kiss the Ground, and you can see that we are able to absorb the amount of carbon that is in the air easily with all the plants that we have if we would just leave them. But this is in March, and the red sky or the red clouds here, that's carbon, right? So next month we are tilling the land. By tilling the land, we are killing all the microorganisms in the soil. And what happens is that all the carbon will eventually go into the atmosphere. Then the plants are starting to grow from months to months, and all the carbon is sucked out of the atmosphere. The problem is not that we have that much carbon. The problem is that it doesn't stay in the soil. And it doesn't stay in the soil because we do intensive agriculture. And beekeeping, or modern beekeeping, is a part of it, because it allows the farmer to kill everything with the pesticides, and after that call the beekeeper who's doing the pollination. So it is, it goes hand to hand, but it's not sustainable at all. That's it from my side, and I thank you very much that you bear with me and that you were listening.